The NFC East has already lost one coach. Another coach has gotten a vote of confidence, perhaps, and another is going to learn their fate on Friday. We're predicting what's happening with Nick Sirianni and the Philadelphia Eagles coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, everybody, to this Friday episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast covering the National Football League, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm David Harrison on Twitter at DHarrison82, host of Locked On Commanders, Locked On Bucks, credential member of the media covering both of those teams for Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation group. Besides, he's Tony Wiggins on Twitter at Shop Talkin' Wig, host of Locked On Jaguars, over a decade of covering football in Duval County. Locked On NFL is here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. We tell you this every day because we mean it. We appreciate you for coming through, supporting the network, supporting your favorite Locked On programs. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase letters to get your first deposit match up to $100. On today's episode, Wig, we're going to predict the divisional round playoffs. We've got some spreads that are actually kind of interesting. We're going to talk about them coming up here in just a little bit. But first, we got some coaching conversations to discuss. And we're going to start off with the Philadelphia Eagles, NFC champions a year ago, ousted in the wild card round by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who barely made the playoffs themselves this season. The Eagles absolutely just dismantling from the inside out after starting 10-1, lose their grip on the number one seed in the NFC, lose their grip on the NFC East division title, end up losing that to the Dallas Cowboys. And now Nick Sirianni is seemingly on the hot plate, although there's been several players, including Fletcher Cox, who straight up called a reporter a clown for even asking him about his opinion about Nick Sirianni reportedly being on the hot seat, which a little brutal, I think. Dude's just trying to do his job. But bottom line, Wig, is there's not a lot of people who believe Nick Sirianni should stay in Philly. He is set to meet with Philadelphia Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie on Friday at the team facility. Let's start with this. What do you think is going to happen?
Based on history, I think Jeffrey Lurie is going to let him go and start all over again. And it will really change a narrative that I deal with every single day when I cover the Jaguars, and that is that somehow Doug Peterson sacrificed himself in Philadelphia just to save his offensive coordinator, Press Taylor. Now, while you can take those words and you can kind of move them around a little bit and say, well, it's not a lie, is it? Yeah, but it ain't the whole truth. The bottom line is this dude fired Andy Reid. This dude fired a coach after winning a Super Bowl 2 years later.
Well,
and now he might be firing the guy a year after making the Super Bowl. It's just that Doug Peterson and folks are saying, well, is he going to do the same thing in Jacksonville? No, because Jeffrey Lurie isn't the owner. And one of the things that I said was about Sirianni, well, maybe Nick Sirianni didn't fire Press Taylor, and that's why he's in hot water. Because now it seems like this is just a guy that, now, to his credit, he fired Andy Reid and won a Super Bowl before Andy Reid won a Super Bowl. And to his credit, he got back to the Super Bowl again with it. So for him, maybe he believes he has the Midas touch and the magic touch along with Howie Roseman, and that they can get anybody to coach that team as long as they agree with him. And when they don't agree with him, they fire him.
I think that's a really good way of looking at it. And I think it's really interesting because kind of what you just said there at the end, I think that GM Howie Roseman has a big role in this. I think if Howie Roseman is behind Nick Sirianni, then ultimately he gets another year. And that is really kind of the widespread thought, is that basically Nick Sirianni is coming in Friday to talk to Jeffrey Lurie. And I mean, depending on when you're listening to this episode, that conversation could be happening as we're talking about this to you in your headset, your car, your office, wherever you're listening. But basically Nick Sirianni's got to come in there and pitch to them. I mean, it's pitching to Jeffrey Lurie, but I have to believe Howie Roseman's probably going to be in the room or in this decision-making process some way, shape, or form. Pitch to them, here's why I deserve to stay for another year. You know what I mean? So make no mistake about it. Like, Nick Sirianni's standing on the carpet. Like, this is not a meeting where Nick is going to go in there, get pat on the back and say, hey man, it's not your fault. Everybody has bad seasons. No, this is absolutely Nick's opportunity to come in there and fight for his job. So anybody who says that there's no way Nick Sirianni is going to get fired. That is not. I don't think that's even close to the truth. There is a possibility that Nick Sirianni comes out of this conversation without a job, which also then bleeds into the reports coming out this week that the Eagles, mainly Nick Sirianni, has already been calling around to other coaches around the NFL to try to test out potentially who might be some coordinators that are going to come in. And the expectation is that all new coordinators in Philadelphia for a second straight year, which typically doesn't spark a whole lot of growth right away. It usually takes a little while for new coordinators, new schemes to really kind of take root and take hold. Frank Wright is a name, Wig, that is now being thrown around, more rumor than report, but being thrown around as potentially coming in as the offensive coordinator for Nick Sirianni, which is, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but Frank Wright was the head coach in Indianapolis when Nick Sirianni was the offensive head coach. He got hired from Indy to run the Eagles. Wig, what do you think about that potential dynamic?
He's also the offensive coordinator when they won the Super Bowl for Doug Peterson. So here's the thing. I'm mixed on it. And what I mean by that, I really believe, because I struggle with this with the team that I cover in Jacksonville, I really believe that there needs to be a real serious connect with a coach and a GM. We saw reports of how Lynch and Shanahan decided to move about their business, and we see that has created a lot of success to the point where other assistant general managers are now hired for the second consecutive cycle. My only issue is at some point there's a line. We already give the coaches the players that we want them to coach. Can you really sit in an office in a suit and tell a guy who's coaching who else needs to blow a whistle with him? To me, that's just too much power. That's too much ego. Even if you have been right, at some point, you're going to be right or you're going to be wrong, because you're going to have the one guy that doesn't need you to do that. And you're going to stick your hand in there in the blender and you're going to keep messing with it and you're going to run off a real good coach. So my thing, and who's to say they haven't already done that before, right? My thing is, at some point, you have to give the head coach the power to choose his own people. Because if you don't, it becomes counterintuitive. And then you start usurping that guy's authority when it comes to other players. Now, does something need to be done? Yeah. Was Philly winning games just on blood and guts? Or did they really just fall off the cliff at the end of the season? I think what they were doing, I think they played the same way at the end of the year that they played at the beginning of the year, because Jacksonville did the same thing. They just happened to be winning those games until other people got their footing, and until we are the Philadelphia Eagles, until that wore off. Because once you start losing, especially when you get punished at home the way they were with San Francisco, now that invincibility comes off, and now there's a layer pulled back, and now people just go, we don't believe you. Until you do it to us, you're not going to be able to get it done. So I think there's a combination of things here. But I also want to point to Howie Roseman. How about not drafting all players from the same college team? I'm just telling you, he settled an argument that I've had in a barbershop for 30 years. The Georgia Bulldogs were the best defense we've seen in college football in 20 years. And one of the arguments that I've constantly had was, could the best college football team in the world beat an NFL team? The answer is a resounding hell no, they'll lose by 5 touchdowns minimum. So people need to stop that foolishness. It's bad enough that people have tried to draft from one conference, but you're going to just try to draft everybody off of one team and you think that's going to work in the NFL. No, it isn't.
Yeah, and then you stop drafting every undersized linebacker in the first round because he's got a lot of speed. Speed doesn't do everything in the NFL these days. Does a lot, but doesn't do everything in the NFL these days. Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this conversation, Wig, and it was pointed out by Chris Long, actually. I can't take credit for this, but he pointed this out, and I want to kind of repeat it because it was really interesting to me. He talked about Nick Sirianni coming in as a head coach, coming in as an offensive head coach, not being a play caller. And he said, point around the league, find me an offensive head coach that is not also his own play caller. You're not going to find one. And if you do, he's not going to be very successful for a while. And I got to admit, that was something that was interesting to me, because Nick Sirianni not being the play caller, typically I actually advocate for head coaches being the head coach, be the manager of the operation, but let your guys operate within your purview. But then I kind of took it a step deeper. And he also pointed out, by the way, Shane Steichen, his offensive coordinator, when he went to the NFL last year, who's now coaching the Indianapolis Colts, he inherited him. That wasn't his hire. His hire, Brian Johnson, who coached and coordinated his offense this year when they fell off that cliff, presumably, and now apparently is going to be out, according to these reports. But I went back, Wig, and Nick Sirianni was the offensive coordinator in Indianapolis when Frank Wright was calling plays. I don't think Nick Sirianni has ever called plays in the National Football League, not to the fullest extent anyway. And I think game flow management adjusting within the framework of each individual contest is incredibly important. So now I'm kind of shifting my stance to where I don't necessarily have a problem with head coaches not being play callers. I still think I prefer that. But if you're going to be a head coach who's not a play caller, you need to have been a play caller at some point in time, because when your offensive coordinator is in the weeds, like we've seen Brian Johnson in the weeds so many times this season, if you're Nick Sirianni and you don't know how to get yourself out of those weeds, you're not going to pull your coordinator out of them. I think that's a real big problem that's going on with the Philadelphia Eagles. I don't know how Nick Sirianni fixes that. And I think that's why Frank Wright's name's coming up, because if he hires Frank Wright as his offensive coordinator, guess what? He don't got to worry about it, because Frank Wright can pull himself out of his own weeds. We'll have more on that here on Locked On NFL as that news breaks and gets produced. Kevin Ostreiger is going to have a lot to talk about that and more stuff coming up Monday. But we're going to talk about another NFC East coaching decision. This one's already been made, Wig. I want to know what you think about Mike McCarthy sticking around with the Dallas Cowboys. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, or all of the above, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. This episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The Baltimore Ravens, San Francisco 49ers, Detroit Lions, and the Buffalo Bills are all favored to win their divisional round matchups. But even if you bet on one and they don't win, you still win. You still get $150 as long as that bet on one of those teams was a $5 variety. The app is so easy to use, and there's different ways to bet, like same game parlays. Find new bets in the Explore tab and make your own parlay in the Parlay Hub and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the National Football League. Thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listen or view today and every day. Thanks again for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Locked On has also launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. We're going to get into our divisional round predictions. We're also going to talk about Mike McCarthy sticking around in Dallas, but wait, coming out on Thursday as well, Josina Anderson. This has not been corroborated or finalized in any way yet. This is why I didn't lead off the show, because it's not official news, but it is expected according to Josina, who I definitely do trust her reporting. So I think this is actually going to be thing that's happening. Bill Belichick is going to go to the Atlanta Falcons. Wig. What do you think of that if that does, in fact, become official?
Well, you talk about new blood, man, and that's exactly what it is. You can't be mad at the Falcons. They know they lost that Super Bowl to Bill Belichick. You can't be mad at any team that gets to the point where they go, he's got to have something left, doesn't he? I mean, it's like Michael Jordan, right? It's like the greatest. He has the touch. And if we take some of the responsibility away from him, you can't be upset about it. The thing is, though, it won't work if he doesn't get a quarterback. And I know that there are a lot of people that will go, was it Bill or was it Tom? And then they'll say, well, Tom won when he left there. But go name me another coach that won a Super Bowl, especially go name me a coach that won multiple Super Bowls without a great player. We could do that throughout history. Is John Wooden without Lou Alcindor and Bill Walton and Elgin Baylor?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, is Phil Jackson without Michael, Kobe, and Shaq? You could do that with just about anybody that's won. Is Pat Riley the same without Showtime, Magic, and Kareem? And then LeBron? I mean, go through any great coach that's an all-timer and talk about Bill Walsh. Is he the same without Montana and Jerry Rice and Steve? No, he's not. Yeah. So I think when people do this, they do it as a gotcha moment for Bill. But I tell you what, I bet when Tom Brady came into the league, he wasn't ready to win no Super Bowl, and somebody taught him how to do it. So you got to give a guy credit. I do think it could work. I think he needs to get his quarterback. And once he gets a quarterback, I think they'll be fine, as long as he's also not the general manager. And it doesn't mean that Bill can't be a GM. I just think that Bill can't be a GM and coach at the same time, especially with the attention to detail that he puts into coaching.
Yeah, it's a hard job. I mean, the strain that a person goes through when they're the head coach and they're operating the roster or managing the roster and the draft positions and all that stuff like that, it's a lot. You know what I mean? Those are two, to kind of take a quote from Josh Harris, the managing partner of the Washington Commanders now, those are 2 80-hour-a-week jobs, and you can't work 160 hours a week. So you're cutting hours from one or both of those jobs to try to do them both. So we'll see how the dynamic works out. But for Falcons fans, like I know a lot of Falcons fans wanted some young blood. You know, there's a lot of new, young, hot head coaches potentially coming out. Ben Johnson, Mike McDonald, Bobby Sloak, Raheem Morris might be getting another opportunity. But for Arthur Blank's 81. And that's really what I think plays into this. Arthur Blank does not have time to bring in a mid-30s head coach and either hope he's the next Sean McVay or keep him around until he wins his first Super Bowl into his 50s. At the end of the day, Arthur Blank, if he's going to get himself a championship, it's got to be sometime soon. I think that's really why they make this move. Go after a guy who wants to win now, and that's their objective across the board, is to win now. Expect the Atlanta Falcons to be very aggressive with their roster, with their draft picks, very, very aggressive. Like you said, they need a quarterback. Doesn't matter. You either got to have a Tom Brady, a Joe Montana, or you need a Ray Lewis on the other side of the ball to make this thing hum. Speaking of coaches that might have a quarterback, might not have a quarterback, but still can't get the job done, Mike McCarthy sticking around in Dallas. Wig, what do you think about that?
I've always liked him for some reason. I just think anytime you coach in Dallas under Jerry Jones' leadership, one, they're going to do a fabulous job of getting you everything you need. Two, you don't even have to talk to the media because he's going to talk to the media for you. So they're going to have a talented football team. They're not going to want to be embarrassed. They're not going to put up with mediocrity. But at some point, it's not going to really be all about you. They have been very, very consistent at playing well in the regular season. I'm not going to put it all on Dak about his playoff performances, although if somebody wants to, that's fine with me. I just think the Dallas Cowboys and the very nature of who they are, especially now, they have this New York Yankees effect. And I know I'm using a lot of analogies and examples from other sports, but that's all that's the only thing I can figure out.
It all works.
It somehow got the Yankees will sign a guy to a $300 million contract who's a perennial all-star. They'll cut his mustache off and he goes to New York and forgets how to play baseball because of the pressure. And I think that there is so much pressure playing in Dallas. And if anybody wants to tell me that the pressure of being a quarterback in Dallas is just like being a quarterback anywhere else, I'll tell them, yeah. And I have some swampland down here in Florida that I'll buy you. And the pressure sometimes is put on him or put on that team because of the owner and the way that he conducts his business and the high profile nature of it. Now, it's not built for everybody. Troy Aikman was perfect for it, but everybody's not built for it either. And I think really when it comes down to it, I'd like to see the Dallas Cowboys build their team to be able to do this. The thing that we talk about that bad football teams can't do when things are going wrong. Because you're talking in the playoffs, you're talking good on good now. They have to at some point say, we ain't going to put it on Dak. We're going to turn around and lean on our offensive line. And then Dak Prescott wasn't on the field the other day when a little number 33 was jitterbugging all through the line of scrimmage. So they got to figure out how to build their team a certain way where the line of scrimmage matters on both sides of the ball, because we could talk about the triplets all day. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Johnson won Super Bowls with the line of scrimmage, and they have to at some point get back to that in modern day football.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're bad in the trenches, it's hard to be good. If you're good in the trenches, it's hard to be bad. That's football, man. It doesn't matter what level you're at. If you're a good trench team, you're going to be successful to a certain level, regardless. I think honestly, Wig, I'll tell you why I think Mike McCarthy is still the coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Dak Prescott's got 1 year left on his contract. Typically, when you give a quarterback a new scheme, he regresses. He doesn't progress until the second year of that scheme. If you bring in a new head coach right now, a new scheme, a new offensive coordinator, Dak Prescott's likely going to regress because that's the natural course of things. His contract is over. If you don't re-sign him, you're now starting year 2 with your new staff with a brand new quarterback, and you're right back to where you started from with a quarterback learning a new scheme. You keep Mike McCarthy. You give Dak Prescott 1 more year to prove that he can take you to the mountaintop. If he can't, you fire Mike. You let Dak walk. You start over fresh with a new coach and a new quarterback in 2025. That's why I think Mike McCarthy is sticking around. But there are 4 games, 8 teams still sticking around in the playoffs. We're going to give you our divisional round predictions coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and then watch your winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the most fun that I've had, winning up to 25 times my money this season. And with basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports from different leagues. For example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made and reception. Sounds interesting. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. That code again, LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. to get yourself a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks daily fantasy sports made easy. All right, wrapping up this episode of Locked On NFL. Now we're getting to the divisional round playoffs. 8 teams still alive in the postseason tournament wig. Starting off on Saturday, Houston Texans visiting the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens are 9.5-point home favorites in this one. What do the Ravens have to do to secure that home win in their first playoff game this postseason?
They just got to be themselves. And this is the classic example of a team that has been there and done that and against an upstart. So you have to go out and establish yourself right away early in the game and don't let off the gas. Lamar Jackson is going to be Lamar Jackson. I love the fact that everybody's saying Lamar isn't the best quarterback in the game. I love it when people do that. If I was a Ravens fan, I'd be chomping at the bit because you know what? That is a built-in way to get those guys to be humble and motivated and come out and say, oh, yeah, oh, really? And that's exactly what you want to do. Instead of coming out like we're the number 1 seed and they're gunning for us. No, to actually be the number 1 seed and have people talking about somebody else like they all that. This is the way you want it to go on. And I think Baltimore's going to pull the business off and win by double digits.
Yeah, I think the Baltimore Ravens are going to win this one too. And I like what the Houston Texans are doing there. And I think you got to play your brand of football and then hope that you get some breaks going your way. I think the rush defense has to step up. If their rush defense is weak and the Baltimore Ravens are allowed to just run the clock and keep that lead fresh and do all those things, and the Texans are going to find themselves in a really bad situation early on. But if CJ Stroud and Nico Collins can do some damage early, and that Houston Texans defense can get some early stops, maybe put a little bit of pressure on the Baltimore Ravens. And, you know, anytime a team falls behind a little bit, things always kind of ramp up. You mentioned that pressure. You're the home team. You're the number 1 seed. You're the AFC favorite. You got the MVP quarterback. You fall behind 10-0 or something like that to the Houston Texans in the first half. Things might get a little bit interesting if the Texans get a little bit more confidence and the Baltimore Ravens get a little bit of pressure put on them.
Here's what I'll tell you. And I know all teams that run the same stuff aren't the same. They played 2 exceptional teams this year, Miami and San Francisco, that both run this system that Houston is basically a carbon copy of offensively and defensively, and they whooped them. They whooped them, and they beat them like they stole something. So we'll see if that same thing happens this weekend.
They handled that business. Also on Saturday, another young upstart team, Green Bay Packers. They got Jordan Love, first-year starter. They got a whole bunch of rookies and second-year receivers going out there against the San Francisco 49ers in San Francisco. And the Niners are also 9.5-point favorites. Wig, I think these are basically 2 of the same games. The Green Bay Packers, you know, it's been a great run. Congratulations getting to the divisional round. You're going to have to play better than you did last weekend to get a win in San Francisco. And the Packers played near perfect. I think Jaden Reed, their impressive rookie out of Michigan State, if the Packers have a chance to beat this Niners team, he's got to turn it into a track meet.
He does. And the other thing is little number 33 I mentioned again, the running back for the Packers. He looks like he's in last year's form. He always used to remind me of Jamal Charles. They're going to need him to be that, and he's going to have to stay healthy in this game. But I think you're right, and I'm going to go along with you and say the 49ers are going to pull it off. But I do think Green Bay they'll show up, and it'll be 2.5 quarters of really, really competitive football before the 49ers pull away.
Yeah, and hey, all those, we talk about coaches and quarterbacks, everybody was saying that Matt LaFleur's career was made off Aaron Rodgers' back. Might be having to backtrack a little bit off of that. Mm-hmm. He's definitely got these Packers playing pretty well with not a lot of well-known household name talent, I would say, on their roster. Moving on to Sunday now, Buccaneers are in Detroit for the divisional round after beating the Philadelphia Eagles. They've taken on the Detroit Lions. The Lions are favored by 6.5 points. Wig, I'll be in Detroit, so I'm going to let you tell me what I'm going to see on the field.
I think you're going to see a team in Tampa that isn't going to let Detroit get rhythmic. And Detroit, they're getting a rhythm, man. Those plays start coming like back to back to back. And I think they're good enough in certain spots to not allow that to happen. I think Jamel Dean is a big physical wide receiver that will come up and contest those balls and a lot of those crossing routes. I think Tampa has the pass rush to really get after Jared Goff. And when you get after Jared Goff, that's when you get Jared Goff that isn't as good as the Jared Goff that you don't get after. So I think it's going to be a real, real competitive game. But I'm going to say Detroit's going to win it on a late field goal.
Yeah, look, these two teams, they played together. They played against each other once. The Lions got a 14-point win over the Buccaneers in Tampa, Florida. This one's in Detroit. That stadium is going to be absolutely insane for this game. I'm really looking forward to the environment. But you're right. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a different team than the Lions saw the last time. However, the Lions are also a different team than the Buccaneers saw, and the Lions were pretty good the last time they saw them, but they're a little bit healthier now than they were back then. I do think that the Buccaneers keep it physical. I do think that the Buccaneers keep it close, but I think we see something out of Detroit, Wig, that we didn't see out of Philadelphia, and that's adjustments to pick up the blitz and protect the quarterback. That's not what we saw Philadelphia do. Again, they got into the weeds offensively, and nobody pulled them out. I think the Detroit Lions, between Dan Campbell, Brian Johnson, Todd Bowles is going to get home a little bit. Todd Bowles is going to put some pressure on Jared Goff, but they're going to figure it out when they need to the most on how to help Jared Goff be successful. And I agree with you. I think the Lions pull off a close victory. I don't think it's 6.5 points, 6 points. I think it's a closer win than the line says. Chiefs and Bills to wrap up the weekend. Bills are 2.5 point favorites. That's the closest line in the divisional round. Who do you think comes out on top of that one?
I'm going to go with Buffalo, man, even though I think Kansas City did something last week that if they had been more consistently doing that all year, we wouldn't have been second guessing it. And that is somehow in the coldest game in the history of Arrowhead Stadium, those wide receivers decided we're catching everything. and maybe it was because Tyreek Hill was there. Maybe it was because that was the focal point of everyone down the stretch. And those guys came up and started snatching the ball. Rashee Rice looked like an all-pro. He looked like Devontae Adams or somebody. So even though they played that game and that game was really good, Buffalo they're due. They're due to beat them. They're due to get to that next game. They're probably due to even go a step further, but I think Baltimore's going to end up stopping them. But they're just due. People have thought that window closed with all of the movement on offense with Dabo gone and then Leslie Frazier gone and then some of the key parts. And then all of a sudden this year they had to win every game down the stretch just to make the playoffs, and they ended up winning the division with it falling the way that it fell. That being said, I think one more win is good enough to put them back on everyone's narratives and radars about how good they are and saying that their window isn't closed. But I don't think it's going to be good enough to get them to the Super Bowl, but we'll get to that next week.
Yeah. Here's the key to this game. I'm looking very early on. Are the Buffalo Bills playing the Kansas City Chiefs in the year 2024 in the division round of the playoffs, or are they playing the Kansas City Chiefs from all the postseason losses they've taken to this team? Because if they're trying to beat the demons from all these playoff games past, the Buffalo Bills are going to get in their own way. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to go into Buffalo and get a win. That's how I think this is going to go down. If the Bills stay within this game, focus on the task at hand, I agree with you. I think they can handle the Chiefs. I'm looking at Travis Kelce. You're right. A lot of passes were getting caught last weekend by the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis Kelce wasn't doing a lot of it. No. Travis Kelce has been frustrated with himself. His brother is probably on his way out of the NFL. If there's going to be a Kelce in the championship round of the playoffs, Travis is the guy that's got to get it done. And I think Travis is going to be a big part of what the Kansas City Chiefs do or don't do. So those are the two things I'm watching on each side of this one. But it promises to be an entertaining game, an entertaining finish to the playoff weekend. On Monday, Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens will be back to recap all of the action. He'll have some of the hosts that are local here covering these games. So make sure you're subscribed. You have those notifications or auto downloads turned on. For your second listen of the day, check out Locked On Jags, Locked On Commanders, Locked On Bucks, or stay right here and we'll kick you over to Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. For Tony Wiggins, I'm David Harrison. We'll see you next Friday. We record on Thursdays. I almost said next Thursday. Next Friday for another episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.